The sky above the battlefield was torn apart by burning ships. Human and alien vessels clashed in a storm of fire. Amid the chaos, a single escape pod fell like a star toward the broken city below. Inside was a girl unlike any human had seen before. Her skin glowed faintly in the dim light, and her silver eyes searched for safety. She was the last heir of the Illyra royal line, and she had never been this close to death before. Captain Daniel Reed was among the human rescue squad moving through the ruins. They were looking for survivors, but the streets were filled with smoke and debris. When he saw the shattered pod, he expected another wounded soldier. Instead, a young alien woman stepped out, dressed in a ceremonial gown torn from the crash. She stood tall despite the dust in her hair, and her gaze locked on him with something between defiance and desperation. Blaster fire echoed from nearby streets, forcing them to take cover. Daniel didn't know who she was, but he knew she was not safe here. "Follow me," he said firmly. She hesitated for a heartbeat before moving closer. He noticed her steps were light, almost floating, and her presence seemed to push back the fear around them. She didn't speak at first, but her eyes stayed on him as if studying every move he made. When they reached a collapsed bridge, she finally spoke. Her voice was soft, yet carried a strange authority. "You are human. Why are you helping me?" Daniel didn't look back as he pulled her across the rubble. "Because leaving you here means you die," he replied. Her lips pressed into a thin line, as though she was not used to hearing such simple answers. In her world, help always came with a cost. They found shelter inside the remains of an old transport station. The building groaned under the weight of fallen steel, but it was hidden from the sky. She stayed near the shadows while he checked his comms for extraction. The signal was weak. She asked his name, and when he gave it, she repeated it slowly as if tasting the sound. "Daniel," she said again, her voice almost like a prayer. He didn't know why hearing it made the air between them feel different. Through the cracked walls, they could see the enemy patrols sweeping the streets. She explained in short, careful words that the ones hunting her were not only soldiers, but sworn guardians of her people's ancient law. Her kind was bound by an oath, and she had broken it. The punishment was death. Daniel didn't ask for details, but he could feel the weight of her secret. She looked at him as if wondering whether a human could understand what she had done. Night fell quickly, and the city grew silent except for distant thunder from orbital strikes. They shared a small ration of water and protein, sitting close, enough to feel each other's warmth. She told him her name was Lysara, and that she was the Illyra Princess. The title meant nothing to him in this war, but the way she carried herself made it clear she was not lying. Her hands were delicate, but her grip was strong, as if she refused to let fear show. As they rested, she finally told him why she was running. Her people believed that their immortality came from a sacred bond to the stars. But to save her world, she had broken that bond. She had chosen to give it up for something she would not name. The hunters chasing her were not only protecting tradition, they were there to erase her from history. And now, by staying with her, Daniel was stepping into a war older and darker than the one he thought he was fighting. Daniel woke to the low hum of ships passing overhead. The ruined station smelled of rust and ash. He shifted carefully so he would not wake Lysara, who was resting against the wall. But her silver eyes opened the moment he moved. She had not truly been asleep at all. And he realized she had been listening to the city's sounds through the night. The comm unit crackled faintly. A human voice called his name through static, giving coordinates for an extraction point. It was across the river, far from their current location. Lysara stepped closer, scanning the skyline for threats. "They will be waiting for us there," she said. Daniel frowned but knew she was probably right. Her people's trackers could find her even through the dust and metal walls of the ruins. They left the station before sunrise, moving through alleys and broken marketplaces. Every few minutes, Lysara would stop and tilt her head as if hearing something far away. Daniel wondered if her senses were sharper than human ones. Once she pulled him into the shadows moments before a patrol passed. The alien soldiers moved. With perfect coordination, their armor glinting in the early light. They carried long spears that hummed with strange energy. When the street ahead opened into a destroyed plaza, Lysara hesitated. In the center was a fallen statue of a tall, robed figure. Daniel noticed her gaze linger on it longer than anything else they had passed. "Who is that?" he asked. "The first immortal," she answered quietly. Her voice carried both pride and sorrow. "From him, our endless life began. And now, because of me, it will end." She turned away before he could ask more. Crossing the river was dangerous. The bridges had been destroyed, and the only option was an unstable tram line still hanging above the water. Daniel tested the metal beam before stepping onto it. Lysara followed with careful balance, her short ceremonial outfit shimmering in the sunlight. Halfway across, a sharp whine echoed, and a blast of energy struck the beam. Daniel grabbed her arm as the metal shook under them, pulling her toward safety. They dropped behind a wrecked vehicle on the far bank. Enemy soldiers were already closing in. Daniel fired his rifle in short bursts, forcing them to cover. Lysara knelt beside him, her hands glowing faintly. "I can slow them," she said. Before he could stop her, she pressed her palms to the ground. A shimmering wall of light rose between them and the attackers. The enemy stopped, hesitating at the sight of it. Daniel stared at her, realizing she was more than just royalty. She was dangerous in ways he did not understand. They moved quickly. After that, weaving through collapsed buildings and empty streets. Lysara spoke little, but Daniel could sense the weight of her decision to use her power. "You should not have seen that," she said finally. "Why?" he asked. She looked at him with a strange sadness. "Because now you are part of the choice I made, and my choice will destroy me." Her words stayed with him as they approached. The extraction point, the designated meeting spot, was an old transport hub covered in vines and dust. A human dropship sat waiting, its engines humming. But standing between them and the ship were 3 Alira hunters, their armor black as obsidian, their faces hidden. They moved with calm precision, blocking any path forward. One spoke in a voice that seemed to echo from the walls. "Princess Lysara, your time is over. Return, and your death will be swift." Daniel raised his weapon, but Lysara stepped in front of him. The air between them was tense, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. Daniel could feel the danger radiating from the 3 Alira hunters. They were taller than him, their black armor reflecting faint streaks of sunlight from the cracked roof above. Their weapons pulsed with a strange glow, ready to strike. Lysara's stance was calm but unyielding, her eyes locked on the leader. "You will not take me," she said firmly. Her voice echoed through the empty station, carrying a tone that was both royal and defiant. The hunters took slow, deliberate steps forward. Daniel moved to stand beside her, rifle raised. The leader tilted his head slightly, as though curious about this human who dared to stand in his way. "He is irrelevant," the hunter said. "He will be forgotten." Lysara's hand shot out, stopping Daniel from firing. She whispered without looking at him. "If you fight, they will kill you first. Let me speak." Daniel gritted his teeth but lowered the rifle slightly. The hunters stopped a few paces away, their black visors glinting. "You broke the sacred bond, princess," the leader said. "You chose a mortal life over your eternal duty. That cannot be forgiven." Lysara's gaze did not waver. "It was my choice to make," she replied. The leader's silence was more dangerous than his words. Without warning, the second hunter raised his weapon. A streak of blue light shot toward them. Daniel reacted instantly, shoving Lysara aside and returning fire. The blast hit the wall behind them, sending fragments of stone across the floor. Lysara landed lightly, spinning back to face them. Her hands glowed again, forming a shield of light that shimmered between them and the hunters. "Enough," she said, her voice sharper than before. The hunters paused, their weapons still raised. The leader finally spoke again. "You will come with us, or the human will die." Daniel's pulse quickened. He had been in battles before, but this was different. These weren't soldiers following orders, they were executioners delivering judgment. Lysara stepped closer to the shield, her silver eyes burning with something fierce. "If you harm him, you destroy the last chance for peace between our peoples," she said. Daniel didn't know what she meant, but the hunters did. The leader raised his hand, signaling the others to hold. "Peace is not our goal," he replied coldly. The shield flickered under the pressure of their weapons' energy, and Lysara staggered. Daniel moved in front of her again, his rifle steady. "You want her, you go through me," he said. The hunters shifted slightly, as though considering the challenge. In that moment, a loud roar filled the air, and the ground shook. Beneath them, from the far end of the station, the human dropship lifted slightly, its engines flaring. A squad of armed human soldiers poured out, taking defensive positions. The hunters turned their heads toward the new arrivals, their formation breaking for the first time. Daniel used the distraction to grab Lysara's hand. "Move," he ordered. They sprinted toward the soldiers as blaster fire erupted between the two sides. The air was filled with heat, light, and the metallic scent of burning steel. A human officer waved them forward, shouting over the noise. "Get her on the ship." Daniel pushed Lysara ahead, covering her as they ran up the boarding ramp. The hunters tried to break through the line of soldiers, but concentrated fire drove them back. Inside the dropship, Lysara collapsed into one of the seats, her chest rising and falling quickly. Daniel crouched beside her, scanning for injuries. "I am fine," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. As the dropship lifted away, Daniel looked out the rear hatch. The hunters stood on the platform, watching them go. There was no sign of defeat in their stance, only a promise that this was far from over. He turned back to Lysara, who was staring at the floor. "You saved me," she said softly. Daniel shook his head. "We saved each other." She met his eyes, and for a moment, the war outside felt distant. But deep down, Daniel knew their escape was only the beginning of something far more dangerous. Asterisk. The dropship cut through the dark clouds, heading for the human forward base. Daniel stayed near the hatch, watching the burning city fade into the distance. His thoughts were on the three hunters they had left behind. He knew they would not stop. Beside him, Lysara sat silently, her hands folded in her lap, eyes distant as though she was carrying a weight heavier than her own survival. When they landed, soldiers moved quickly to secure the perimeter. Daniel guided Lysara down the ramp, where the base commander waited. The commander's sharp gaze swept over her before turning to Daniel. "You realize bringing her here puts everyone at risk," he said. Daniel stood firm. "She's not a threat to us." The commander's eyes narrowed, but he didn't argue further. Instead, he ordered her to be taken to the secure quarters. Inside the base, the air smelled of fuel and metal. Lysara followed without protest, though Daniel could tell she disliked the stares from passing soldiers. In her world, no one would dare look directly at a royal without permission. Here, she was a mystery, and humans did not hide their curiosity. When they reached the secure quarters, Daniel stopped the guard from locking the door. "She stays under my watch," he said. The guard hesitated, then stepped back. Once they were alone, Daniel poured 2 cups of water from the dispenser. Lysara accepted hers, but did not drink. "Your people think I am dangerous," she said softly. "Are you?" Daniel asked. Her lips curved slightly, though it was not a smile. "Only to those who try to take my freedom." She finally took a sip, the faint glow of her skin reflecting in the cup. Daniel studied her, wondering if she had been trained for war or if survival had simply become her skill. A low alarm echoed through the base, cutting their conversation short. Daniel's cum activated with a sharp tone. "Perimeter breach, North Sector," a voice said. He looked at Lysara, and her expression told him everything before the words did. "The hunters," she said. Her voice held no fear, only certainty. Daniel grabbed his rifle and signaled for her to stay behind him as they left the room. The corridors were alive with the sound of boots and shouted orders. Daniel pushed through until they reached the command center. Screens showed black armored figures moving through the fog outside the base. They were moving fast, avoiding heavy fire with unnatural precision. The commander barked orders, directing troops to hold them off. Lysara stepped forward, her eyes locked on the images. "They will not stop until they take me," she said. "Then we move you somewhere they can't follow," Daniel replied. The commander glanced between them. "Moving her now is too risky," he said. "We dig in and hold." Daniel didn't like the idea of trapping her here, but he had no choice. Lysara placed her hand on his arm. "If they break through, you must let me go. They want me, not your soldiers." Daniel shook his head, but she didn't push the point. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment longer before turning back to the screens. Outside, the battle intensified. Explosions lit up the fog, casting brief flashes through the base's narrow windows. The hunters moved closer, their armor shrugging off small arms fire. Daniel's squad was called to reinforce the northern gate. He turned to Lysara. "Stay here. Do not open the door for anyone but me." She nodded once, but her eyes betrayed a thought she was not sharing. Daniel forced himself to leave, the sound of gunfire growing louder as he approached the front line. The northern gate was shaking under the force of repeated impacts. Daniel's squad took positions, weapons ready. Through the mist, 3 dark shapes emerged. The hunters stopped just outside the range of the floodlights. One raised a hand, and the gate's metal frame groaned as if under an invisible grip. Daniel fired first, the shot sparking against the figure's chestplate. The battle erupted in a storm of light and sound, each shot answered by the hunter's relentless advance. Gunfire lit the night as Daniel's squad fought to hold the northern gate. The hunters advanced without hesitation, their black armor reflecting the flashes of light. Every hit from human rifles seemed to slow them for only a heartbeat before they pushed forward again. The air was filled with the sound of strained metal as the gate's frame bent under invisible pressure from their strange weapons. Daniel shouted for his squad to focus fire on one target at a time. Concentrated blasts struck the lead hunter, forcing him to stagger back. For a moment, Daniel thought they might hold the line. Then the second hunter leapt forward, moving faster than the eye could follow, and slammed into the gate with enough force to twist the steel beams. Soldiers scrambled to keep their positions, but the barrier was breaking. A burst of static filled. "Daniel's come. They're inside." A voice called from the south corridor. His stomach tightened. If the hunters had breached another entrance, Lysara was in danger. He turned to his second-in-command and ordered him to hold the gate no matter the cost. Without waiting for a reply, Daniel broke into a sprint toward the inner base. The sound of gunfire fading behind him. The corridors were chaos. Soldiers rushed past, some carrying the wounded, others taking up defensive positions. Daniel pushed through, ignoring the pain in his legs from the run. He reached the secure quarters and found the door forced open. Inside, the room was empty. His chest tightened until he spotted a trail of faint glowing footprints leading toward the eastern hangar. Lysara had not been taken yet. She was moving. On her own, he followed the glowing trail, weaving between crates and damaged walls. The hangar was dim, lit only by the soft blue glow of emergency lights. At the far end, Lysara stood with her back to him, facing 3 hunters who had cornered her. Daniel raised his rifle, but before he could fire, one hunter raised his palm and sent a pulse of energy that knocked him off his feet. The weapon slid from his hands, clattering across the floor. Lysara's voice cut through the echoing hangar. "You will not touch him." She stepped forward, her hands glowing brighter than Daniel had ever seen. The light spread across the floor in a circle, forcing the hunters to step back. The leader tilted his head. "You waste your power on a mortal." She met his gaze without fear. "This mortal has done more for me than all of you combined." Her voice carried the weight of her choice. Daniel struggled to his knees, the heat from her power warming the air around him. He could feel something strange in that light, a pulse like a heartbeat that made his skin tingle. The hunters seemed to hesitate, as if unsure whether to strike. The leader finally lowered his weapon. "If you come now, we will spare him." Lysara shook her head slowly. "You will leave, or you will fall." Her words hung in the air like a blade. The moment snapped as the second hunter charged. Lysara raised her hands, and a wall of light exploded outward, throwing the attacker across the hangar. Daniel grabbed his rifle and fired at the third hunter, forcing him to retreat toward the shadows. The leader stood his ground, his armor smoking from the edge of her power. "You cannot run forever," he said before vanishing. In a sudden flash that left the air humming with residual energy, Lysara's shoulders slumped as the glow faded from her hands. Daniel caught her before she could collapse completely. "I had to end it here," she whispered. He shook his head. "It's not over." She looked at him with tired eyes. "No, but the choice I made is set now. There is no going back." He didn't understand all of what she meant, but the finality in her tone was clear. She had crossed a line that could never be undone. Asterisk. The hangar was silent except for the distant hum of the base's power systems. Daniel supported Lysara as they moved toward the nearest bench. She sat down slowly, her breathing heavy but steady. He kept his eyes on the shadows, half expecting the hunters to return at any moment. Every instinct told him they were not finished with her, but for now, they were gone. Medics arrived a few minutes later, scanning Lysara for injuries. She waved them away with a slight motion of her hand. "Save your resources for your wounded soldiers," she said. Daniel wanted to insist, but the determination in her voice made it clear she would not allow them to waste time on her. She was tired, but her pride was intact. Even after everything, she held herself like a ruler. The commander entered the hangar, his face hard. "You realize they'll be back," he said. Daniel nodded without looking away from Lysara. "Then we'll be ready." The commander's gaze shifted to her. "If your presence puts my base at risk again, I will order you off-world." Lysara met his stare without flinching. "You would be wise to keep me close. Without me, they will not stop at your gates. They will burn everything in their path." When the commander left, Daniel sat beside her. "You could have gone with them and ended this," he said quietly. She shook her head. "No, going with them would not end it. They would kill me, and then they would come for you." He frowned, unsure why he mattered so much in her story. "Why me?" She took a long breath before answering. "Because the choice I made was for you." Her words stayed in the air, like a weight he couldn't ignore. He thought back to the first time he saw her, stepping out of the escape pod. She had looked at him then the same way she did now, with a mix of defiance and something else he couldn't name. "You sacrificed immortality for me?" he asked. She looked away, her silver eyes reflecting the dim light. "Yes, and now that I have, the bond that kept my people eternal is broken." Daniel felt the enormity of her decision press against him. Billions of lives tied to a single ancient oath, and she had severed it. "They'll never forgive you," he said. "Forgiveness was never my goal," she replied. Her tone was calm, almost peaceful. "My goal was to choose my own fate, even if it meant losing forever what I was born to be." He understood now that her fight was not only for survival but for freedom. Outside, the sounds of the battle had faded. The base was quiet, though soldiers still moved through the halls. Daniel knew this was only a pause. The hunters would return, perhaps with more strength than before. He turned back to Lysara. "If they come again, will you run?" She shook her head. "No, I will stand here with you. I have made my choice, and I will see it through to the end." For the first time since they met, Daniel allowed himself to believe she truly trusted him. She was no longer just a royal fleeing her people's law. She was his ally, maybe more. The thought was dangerous, but it didn't leave him. "Then we fight together," he said. She gave a faint nod, her lips curving just slightly. It wasn't quite a smile, but it carried a promise of what was to come. The intercom crackled, breaking the moment. "Incoming ships detected. Unknown configuration," a voice reported. Daniel stood, his rifle already in his hands. Lysara rose beside him, her eyes glowing faintly once more. The rest had ended. The next wave was already here. Whatever happened next, they would face it side by side. And Daniel knew that this was no longer just about war. It was about something far greater than either of them had imagined. The base's alarms blared as soldiers rushed to defensive positions. Outside, the night sky was lit by the glow of approaching ships. They moved in perfect formation, their hulls black against the burning clouds. Daniel tightened his grip on his rifle, his eyes scanning the horizon through the viewing port. Beside him, Lysara stood calm, but the faint glow of her skin had grown brighter, as though preparing for what was to come. The commander's voice rang out across the comm system, ordering all squads to their stations. Heavy turrets rotated into position, their barrels glowing faintly as power surged through them. Daniel and Lysara moved together toward the northern wall. "Those aren't hunter ships," Daniel said. She nodded slowly. "No, they are war barges. My people's answer when they intend to erase a world." The weight in her tone made the air between them feel colder. Soldiers looked at her with uncertainty as she walked along the line. Some had seen her power in the hangar. Others only knew she was the reason the enemy kept coming. Lysara ignored the stares, her gaze fixed on the incoming fleet. "When they land, they will not stop to take prisoners," she told Daniel quietly. "They will burn the base, then the city beyond." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then we stop them here." His words were firm, but he knew how thin their chances were. The first barrage came from the sky. Explosions tore through the outer wall, sending debris flying. The air filled with the screams of metal and the heat of fire. Daniel pulled Lysara down behind a barricade as plasma bolts scorched the ground around them. She placed her hands against the earth, and a ripple of light spread out like a shield. The next volley struck it and scattered, buying the soldiers a precious few seconds. Through the smoke, dark figures emerged, moving with the same precision as the hunters, but in far greater numbers. They carried long weapons shaped like spears, each tipped with a blade that shimmered unnaturally. The front line of human soldiers opened fire, cutting several down, but the rest pushed forward without hesitation. Daniel rose from cover, firing in controlled bursts, every shot placed to slow their advance. Lysara stayed close, the light from her shield pulsing with each strike it absorbed. One of the enemy warriors broke through, charging straight toward them. Daniel stepped in front, blocking the blow with the edge of his rifle before delivering a shot at point-blank range. The warrior fell, but two more replaced him instantly. Lysara's eyes flared as she raised both hands, sending a shockwave of light that threw them back. The effort made her stagger, and Daniel caught her before she fell. "Save your strength," he told her. "You'll need it before the end." She gave a single nod. The fight raged on, the ground littered with fallen soldiers from both sides. Over the roar of weapons and the crash of explosions, the sound of engines grew louder. More ships were landing beyond the ridge, their silhouettes towering in the distance. Lysara's face hardened. "They've brought the High Council," she said. Daniel frowned. "That means nothing to me." She looked at him then, her voice steady. "It means they have come to kill me themselves." A sudden silence fell as the largest of the ships touched down. Its ramp lowered slowly, revealing a group of tall figures in flowing black robes. Their faces were hidden behind silver masks, each etched with the markings of their rank. The soldiers on both sides seemed to pause, waiting for the council's next move. Lysara stepped forward, her glow brighter than ever. Daniel reached for her arm, but she shook her head. "I must face them," she said. "This is my choice, not yours." Daniel followed anyway, staying close enough to cover her. The council's leader raised a hand, and the noise of battle faded completely. "Princess Lysara," the voice called, deep and cold, "you have defied the stars themselves. Return to us, and we will grant you a clean death." Lysara's chin lifted, her eyes like molten silver. "No, I will live by my choice, and I will die by it. But it will not be here, and it will not be by your hand." The battlefield was silent as Lysara faced the massed figures of the High Council. Smoke curled around them from the fires still burning along the ruined walls. Daniel stood a step behind her, his rifle ready, his eyes locked on the slightest movement from the enemy. The air felt charged, as though the very ground knew that something irreversible was about to happen. The council leader took a slow step forward, the silver mask reflecting the dim light of the fires. "You cast aside the gift of the stars for a mortal," the voice said, deep and resonant. "You abandoned eternity for a fleeting bond." Lysara's gaze did not falter. "I chose a life I could shape myself. I chose freedom over chains that called themselves blessings." The words rang through the quiet air like steel against stone. A ripple of movement passed through the council. Some shifted their stance, others tightened their grip on the long, ceremonial blades they carried. The leader's tone grew colder. "Then you are no longer Illyra. Your bloodline ends here." Daniel took a step forward, positioning himself between Lysara and the threat. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me." His voice carried no hesitation, and his stance made it clear he meant every word. The soldiers flanking the council moved, but the leader raised a hand to halt them. "You would die for her?" the voice asked. Daniel didn't look away. "I'd live for her, and that's harder." For a moment, the leader was still. Then the masked head tilted slightly, as though considering this unexpected answer. Lysara's fingers brushed Daniel's arm in a silent gesture, her touch grounding him in the moment. The leader lowered his hand and spoke again. "If you will not return, then we will destroy this place. All who shelter you will perish." Lysara stepped forward, the glow of her skin intensifying until it lit the faces of the soldiers around them. "No, you will leave. And you will not return." Her voice carried a weight that seemed to press against the air itself. The ground beneath her feet shimmered faintly as though responding to her will. A low hum filled the air, growing louder with every heartbeat. The light from Lysara's body spread outward in a wave, passing over the ground and up the walls of the base. Where it touched, the cracks sealed, the fires died, and the rubble vanished. Soldiers and council alike stood frozen, watching as the base was restored to its full strength in seconds. When the glow faded, Lysara stood taller, her eyes brighter than ever. "This is the last gift you will see from me," she said. "The bond to the stars is gone, but I have enough left to protect what I choose." The leader's mask tilted again, but this time the movement seemed slower, almost reluctant. "You have sealed your fate," the voice said. Lysara shook her head. "No, I have written it." The council turned without another word, their soldiers following in perfect silence as they walked back toward their ship. When the enemy vessels rose into the sky and vanished into the clouds, the base erupted in sound. Soldiers shouted in relief, weapons lowered, and the wounded were carried to safety. Daniel turned to Laysara, searching her face. "What did that cost you?" he asked quietly. She met his eyes, and for the first time, she smiled without restraint. "Everything. But it was worth it." Her voice held no regret, only peace. He reached for her hand, and she let him take it. Around them, the base worked to repair what little damage remained. For now, there was safety. For now, there was time. So what happens next? Daniel asked. She looked out toward the horizon, where the first light of morning was breaking through the clouds. "Next we live. And we make every moment count, because they will never come again."